OpenAI has just released its reasoning model. It was called Strawberry as a code name, but now it's being called O1 as its public release. And we're going to talk all about what it is, what it means, and where OpenAI and the AI race goes from here. And we have the perfect guest host for us to do it. Parmy Olson is here. She's a technology columnist with Bloomberg, and she's also the author of a new book out this week. It's called Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. And what a week to release a book, because we're just like here flooded with AI news. Parmy, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'm a big fan of the show, so just so pleased to be able to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and thanks for coming on. You know, I was like thinking, okay, Apple's going to be the big news of the week, so let's get it out Wednesday. And I think at this point, it's amazing. Apple Intelligence and the iPhone 16 are kind of like a distant memory at this point, because of what we've seen over the past couple of days. Exactly. Yeah. So let's get to the big news, which is that we've been hearing rumors that OpenAI was going to release this Strawberry model, it was initially called Q-Star, and there were worries about it around the Sam Altman ouster, and it's here. And basically the big thing about this model is that it does reasoning. And so you can ask it a question and you can actually kind of see the way that it thinks through the problem. It goes through a bunch of different steps. And that's enabled it to be much, much better, more accurate, more competent, smarter than any previous model. So I'm like looking at some of the charts that OpenAI put out with the release. I'm looking at accuracy. So if you think about competition math, GPT-4o was getting a 13.4 accuracy score on competition math. But this thing, in the way that it can think through the different problems, is getting 83.3 score on accuracy with competition math. So it jumped from 13.4 to 83.3. On competition code, it goes from an 11 to an 89. And PhD level science question, actually, GPT-4o wasn't bad at a 56, but O1 gets a 78. And O1 Preview, which is the model that's out now, gets a 78.3, where an expert human gets 69.7 accuracy score. I think that's just the percent of questions they get accurate. That's the accuracy score. Parmy, what do you think about the release of these models? Do they live up to the hype? I mean, we basically saw a moment where, was Sam Altman pushed out of OpenAI because they thought he wasn't being careful about this type of model? Like, that was one of the assumptions. Are these a big step forward? What do you think about the release of these models?
Well, first of all, I think I would put this into context of the huge amount of pressure that OpenAI has been under for the last year to get out something that's going to cause as much awe as ChatGPT did in November 2022 and DALL-E before that. And I thought it was really interesting that in the last few months, we've been getting this sense that, hey, OpenAI has been announcing a lot of things, but it hasn't actually been launching the things that it's been announcing. So, for example, there was the whole Sora video thing.
Yeah, where is that?
Yeah, where was that? Even GPT-4o, the voice activated, the sort of voice conversational interface. I just met people in San Francisco last week who were like, yeah, I still haven't been able to try that yet. It hasn't really fully rolled out.
Yeah, Parmy, can I tell you something about that? So first of all,
no, please.
I've been wondering where it is, because I've been signed up to ChatGPT Premium for a while and hoped that I would get that new voice interface, and I haven't gotten it yet. And I'll just say this, over the past 24 hours, I've been monitoring the chatter around the Strawberry and O1 release. And my favorite exchange is Sam Altman announcing, I don't know if you've seen this, he says, rollout complete. It's live up to 100% of ChatGPT Plus and team users now. This is of the new reasoning model. And one of the first replies is from this guy, Matt Paulson, who goes, when are we getting the new voice features?
Well, yeah. Do the thing you said you were going to do first.
Yeah, and Sam responds, hey, how about a couple of weeks of gratitude for magic intelligence in the sky, and then you can have more toys soon. I mean,
oh my goodness.
It was interesting, but also just like so revealing of the frustration, I think, that you're noting, of the fact that like we haven't seen Sora released broadly. We haven't seen the voice features released broadly.
And I think that's kind of the trap that Sam and his company has kind of put themselves in by just releasing a lot of demoware, which is very exciting. And but if you start getting people too excited for too long a time and then you don't give them anything, then they start to get a little bit frustrated and a little bit cynical of what's actually going on behind the curtain. And you know what? It's funny what you just said that you've been signed up to premium. I have done exactly the same thing because I signed up to Claude and I'm paying for two subscriptions to these things.
Yes,
But
me
I'm
too.
keeping, I kept ChatGPT Plus because I wanted to try out the voice interface, and it still hasn't shown up on my phone either. So here we go.
Yeah.
Um, so I think,
Probably it's funny because I was waiting for voice forever and it didn't come. So I
mhm,
unsubscribed from Plus and my subscription ends today. This was not planned. So I've been
uh-oh.
able to actually try out GPT O1 and it's been pretty interesting, but still no voice.
So,
But
so
I
what,
guess
have you got
I've
only
had
12 hours left
yeah, exactly.
before
I've
you
been
can
just,
stop?
there's like a monthly cap. There's a very small monthly cap or
Yeah, I
something like that, or
noticed
weekly
that.
cap. And I
Yeah,
have like not cared about rate limits. I've been like testing the crap out of this thing because I'm like, all right,
you might as
you know,
well.
yeah. And I'll just share like my initial reaction to it, and I'm curious what
hmm
you think about it. It feels like this thing is extremely math and code based. Like that's where the actual breakthroughs are going to be. Like I said, when I was reading these benchmarks, it's competition math, competition code, PhD level science questions that it's pauses. And by the way, when you're doing the queries, you can actually see it pause and think
Yeah.
think through each
Well,
step
do
of
we
what
want to
it's
use the
supposed.
word think?
Yeah,
Process,
I
maybe?
do,
Yeah.
and you
Okay,
can you
go
can
ahead.
correct me on it, but
Okay.
you can see it like go and tackle. Now I'm getting nervous about think, but you can see it tackle each different step. And there was actually like if you look at the consumer preferences, like the human preferences, like where they'd want to use these new O1 preview models versus GPT-4o, they actually prefer GPT-4o for personal writing. It's about even on editing text, but where GPT this O1 model really thrives is it's much more preferred for computer programming, data analysis, and mathematical calculation. And that's why I think that when you get into this, like people start to judge, is this a step forward? The people who are using it for more technical activities are really going to see a jump, and the people who are using it for more stuff like I would, like writing or editing text, aren't going to see it. So there might be a bias among journalists to pan this thing, whereas
Hmm.
like people in the technical fields are going to be seeing that there's real advances. So
Well,
so I'm curious to get your take on like on this. What do you think about this? Like again, going back to that question. Yes, we know OpenAI is feeling the pressure, but like is how should we view this? Is this the promised step forward?
well, I think it's a good strategy, what you just described, that if this is a model that is perhaps more useful for people who are doing data analysis, they're scientists, they're coders, then they've got a specific models which just has a little bit more of a clear utility for them. Whereas if you're in marketing or you're in customer service, then you're more likely to use the previous model, something like GPT 4o, which is a lot more sort of language oriented as opposed to reasoning oriented. I think that's no bad thing in terms of business use case because I think till now there's been this kind of um, this effort to try and create this. Well, we started off with this ambition to create artificial general intelligence, right? That was the founding of OpenAI. We want to create AI that has the same broad cognitive capabilities as the human mind. Um, and I think that actually has a big downside when you're actually trying to sell something packaged like that to businesses, which is that you're giving them this Swiss Army knife of a tool that has all these general capabilities. And the risk is that your end customer can end up just becoming paralyzed with indecision on what to do. Like if you talk to some businesses who are trying to figure out how to use generative AI models, I heard from one bank, for instance, they put out a survey to their employees just saying, how should we use generative AI? And they got more than 1,000 responses back from their employees, which is great in one way. But in another way, it actually just makes everything take a bit longer and in terms of figuring out a strategy on how best to use it. So I actually think from what you're describing, if the models are starting to kind of fracture a little bit, and there's going to be a sense going forward that you can use this type of model for mathematical based processes and data analysis, and then you can use this kind for language processing. Maybe that kind of runs counter to the original ideology of let's build a broad, godlike, general level intelligent AI. Maybe it does. Maybe it's moving away from that. But I think, like practically speaking, that kind of makes a bit more sense.
Right. So do you think that Ilya was, let's say Ilya was spooked by these type of capabilities? I'm sensing the way that you're talking about it that maybe that was a little premature.
Oh yeah, I think there's so much that comes out of OpenAI that is just completely blown out of proportion and wrong. Like for example, when Sam Altman was fired, there were a lot of rumors going around that the board members who fired him did so because they were big time effective altruists and they were just driven by this kind of almost religious fundamentalist fervor over this idea of being of sort of being worried about the safety of humanity under AI and under Sam. And I've heard from people who really know, like who should know, that that is not the case at all. And
What
yet
was
those
it?
rumors, well, the real reason was that the board was concerned that Sam was not telling the truth. He just was not a reliable source of information. And it wasn't just the board members who felt that. There were top executives who felt that as well.
Right.
Um,
That's such
so
an odd. Anyway, we don't have to rehash the whole
we,
firing again, but it's such an odd reason to. I
but I
mean,
would,
yes, I guess
yeah,
you don't want your chief executive lying, but like there wasn't like any demonstrable like bad behavior, and the company was crushing it. So
mm,
I don't know. Am
yes,
I giving him too easy of a pass?
maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit because the concern was, as I say, it wasn't just from the board members; it was top exexecutives too, and
Yeah,
there
but
was this
Ilya eventually,
from people I spoke to.
but Ilya who led this kind of went back on it and apologized. So it was not really
Yeah,
such a strongly held belief, or maybe it was. What's your take on it?
I mean, we don't know why people say what they say publicly versus
Right.
what they actually think and what they actually say behind closed doors. Just look at what's at stake. Billions of dollars, incredible levels of prestige, possible Nobel prizes, like
Yeah.
that doesn't breed an environment for honesty.
Yep. So let's get back to this use cases of this stuff. I mean, if so one of the things I've been thinking about as O1 has released or Strawberry has released has been okay. So the models are smarter. Where's the application? I think you sort of brought that up. Um,
Yeah.
it's like, are we gonna? This is one of the things that has been sort of plaguing the AI industry, even though it's doing well, obviously. But it's been like, okay, the models are getting smarter and they do magical things, but we still don't really know how to use them in practice,
Hmm.
right? This is actually something that I highlighted. There was a Grok engineer who said, O1 seems powerful so far, but everyone is kind of unsure what to do with it. Kind of humorous place to be after all the speculation. So what do you think
Yeah.
happens as these models get smarter in fields like science and coding
Yeah,
and
I think
math?
it's really interesting because there's this race in Silicon Valley to make everything more and more capable, which is disconnected, I think, a little bit from the sentiment among their enterprise like businesses in the rest of the world who are just like, we don't necessarily need AI that's more capable. We just like we're quite happy with what you've already put out there. Like that is already pretty impressive and as a step change up from what was even available 2 years ago. Um, so my sense over the last year has been one thing that's been lacking from the AI model vendors like OpenAI, like Anthropic, like Google, Microsoft with Azure, has been just to do a little bit more hand holding with their business customers on how to actually implement the current models that are available. But I think there's just this kind of, um, you know, rabid enthusiasm to try and just make these models smarter and smarter. You've talked on your show before about the arms race. It's kind of had this. It's got this kind of self-perpetuating cycle that even like Salesforce last night, just their announcement got completely overshadowed by OpenAI, but they announced Agent Force, which is basically what they say is the very first AI platform for businesses that has autonomous agents. There are startups that have been talking about doing this but haven't released this, and I haven't seen anything similar. I don't know if you have, but from Google or OpenAI or even Anthropic, people are talking about it, and it looks like Salesforce is the first to do it. So there's this real, and they're very proud of that. And so there's
I'm
this
just
real
going to call
competition
bullshit on that. I don't think Salesforce is going to be the leader in AI agents or even the pioneer.
It'd
I've
be
heard
interesting
people
to
talk
see.
about things as AI
Yeah.
agents, then you take a look at what it is, and it's like there's no agent to it.
Well, and what does the agent even mean, right? I mean, when I was talking to them about it, and they were saying, I was saying, well, are you using the word bot and agent interchangeably? And they said, oh, no, 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 bots, those are old. That's not the agents are new. That's
Yeah.
the new thing. So a bot would be if you're talking to a customer service chatbot, and it just kind of is based on a large language model and uses predictive technology to say something that sounds about right, whereas an agent can actually resolve your issue by retrieving data about you, the customer, from the Salesforce CRM and the data cloud, which is one of their big services that came out 2 years ago. Um, and so it means these things can actually take action. But I'm with you on that, Alex. Like I don't, we've seen so much of this in AI, just a lot of big announcements, a lot of excitement, but then you see businesses actually just struggling a little bit to make these things work for them and work well.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to read a couple examples of folks who've been trying out O1 and why this might be different. And I think you're right to point out the difference between like chat and bots, or bots and agents, and
Yeah.
because this is like from somebody who works at this company called Spellbook Legal. His name is Scott Stevenson. It's very interesting that he says O1 is extremely good at long document manipulation. Docker vision is one of the hardest problems we've dealt with. Like for example, taking a long set of instructions and modifying a legal document. And O1 is really good at this. When people are overwhelmed by O1, I think it's because they're thinking of it as chat still. And its ability to do work is going to be really good once function calling is fully supported. So, I think that like with these bots, it is definitely like, we talked about hand holding. And, maybe these companies need to do a little bit more hand holding, but I think often in technology, what happens is they put the capabilities out there and then people like Scott Stevenson, right, figure out the way to do it because they're just using it more often. And that's why they're putting this out in preview. And that's the sort of use cases that get spread by word of mouth or productized. And maybe that's what happens. And I would say that would be the argument to keep just building these
Oh yeah.
models, making these models smarter. And maybe the thing is that they've gotten so fast, so smart, so fast that they've sort of outpaced the utility because we haven't had enough time, or the industry hasn't had enough time to put their hands on and
Yeah.
try things like this. What do you
And
think?
actually digest it. Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very valid point. And I think, coming from, so I'm based in London, and I hear a lot more. I'm not being based in San Francisco. I'm not in the Silicon Valley bubble. So being in London, I hear a lot more of kind of the rhetoric from people on the East Coast of the US, from Wall Street, from investors, from hedge funds, from healthcare companies, legal firms, and there's a real sense of skepticism over the last few months, which I know you've talked about, but I think it's not entirely warranted. Like I think like this market correction that's happened in the last few months was healthy. Like it was crazy that Nvidia became worth $3 trillion at one point in market capitalization. Um, and I think that when people talk about hype, I think so much of the hype is about timelines. There's a sense that um, businesses and investors kind of got this impression that AI was going to start bringing a return on investment for companies sooner rather than later. Like I was talking to one CEO of an AI vendor a few months ago, and I was saying, so how are you going to measure how are we going to measure success for generative AI in terms of return on investment for businesses? And you know what he said? He said, in the next 2 or 3 quarters, you're just going to see more Fortune 500 companies report an increase in EBITDA numbers. Like they're just going to have higher profits. I just think that's ludicrous. Like, really? Like in the next 2 quarters, more businesses are just going to make more money because of AI, and that's
Yeah,
how
it's
we'll
going to take
know.
time.
It's going to take way more time than that. And that's been the case with every major tech revolution, whether it was search or desktop or mobile. We all
Right.
know about the Gartner hype cycle, and these things just take time to implement. So yes, if the AI vendors in Silicon Valley is racing ahead on capabilities, then sure, maybe the businesses just need to catch up.
And so with reasoning, a lot of people have talked about how it lays the groundwork for these agents because again, like seeing it, it's pretty amazing watching using these models and then watching it go through the multi-step process. And the idea is like, all right, if you're going to have an agent that's going to go and take action for you on your behalf, it's going to need to be able to like process step by step in order to do that. And this is the way that OpenAI is describing it. So this is from their head of research, Bob Magoo, in The Verge. We have been spending many months working on reasoning because we think this is actually the critical breakthrough. Fundamentally, this is a new modality for models in order to be able to solve the really hard problems that it takes in order to progress toward human-like levels of intelligence. So I'm curious, like, do you think this is a step toward agents, and why is reasoning this sort of, as he describes it, the fundamental or the critical breakthrough?
Well, I think that what you were just you earlier you described the tweet from someone and what they were describing in terms of when they played around with GPT, this new
Right, having it
O1.
do the work.
Yes, it made it sound like there was some gray area here where it had almost agentic properties. Why is reasoning important? Well, I think this just gives it more broader capability. And I think it's really interesting that OpenAI hasn't actually used the word agent once in its announcement, and it doesn't sound like any of its scientists have talked about that either. I
Well,
noticed
doesn't
in,
Bloomberg have this like you didn't Bloomberg publish the OpenAI's like imagining its future, and it has like 5 levels, and level 1 is chatbots, level 2 is reasoning, level 3 is agents, level 4 is the AI innovates, and then level 5 is the AI does work at the level of an organization. So
Mhm.
the suggestion would be that we're at level 2,
Yes, level
and
two,
that
yeah,
agent
still a
level
ways
is
to
what's
go.
next.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I thought it was really interesting in OpenAI's. See, I think right now it's just a matter of it's like you said, they put the technology out there, and they don't really know necessarily how it's going to be used. It's sort of the experimentation is done by everyone else out in the world, among businesses and organizations. They did give some suggestions in their blog post. So they said, I'm just reading from one section, which I thought was the most interesting, was that O1 can be used by healthcare researchers to annotate cell sequencing data, by physicists to generate complicated mathematical formulas needed for quantum optics. I'm going to stop there. Those are really, really
Yeah,
specific things,
technical
right?
stuff,
Very
mathy
specific.
stuff.
And then they end it with this bit. Then they say, and by developers in all fields to build and execute multi-step workflows. That's like anything, basically. So they go from,
Damn.
they
Parmy,
basically make
maybe
it so,
that guy who told you that you're going to see this in EBITDA in the
yeah.
next few quarters, maybe they're right. I don't
You
know.
think he was right?
No, probably not. But I can see why he thinks that, right? Because
Yeah.
again, this is going to come to like the very like labor intensive, very high value tasks in our economy. That's what it's going to do.
Yeah,
So
but don't you think also like already there's been a lot of concern among businesses about hallucinations, right, from these
yeah,
models. Now when you give them the capability of taking action, so again, sorry to go back to the Salesforce, but it's just because I have a concrate example
right.
that they gave me,
Yeah, let's use
which
Salesforce.
was
Why
which
not?
was this agent in their in the customer service chatbot, which could retrieve data and basically resolve a ticket in the
Hmm.
same way that a customer service representative would do, um, that's putting even more faith in these models. Like, it's one thing to make a mistake about information, but to actually screw up the process of, you know, resolving someone's complaint or getting some information for them, that's a bit more high stakes. So, to be honest, I have no idea how this will play out. And I think businesses are going to be very cautious just because there has been so much concern about hallucinations till now.
Right. Yeah, and OpenAI even in its blog post says that this does not solve hallucinations. And then you can
Oh,
You
Did
can
they say
go.
that in the latest
Yeah, they
blog post
did.
that this does?
And
Oh,
you
interesting.
could
Okay.
also go to some of the critics. They're having a field day with this. Here's Ed Zitron. We have our big stupid magic trick, folks. Strawberry. It's OpenAI's new model. It will take 10 to 20 seconds to give slightly better answers, and it's buggy. OpenAI is getting desperate, and this is a real deal pale horse.
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit over the top. What do you think?
It has to be. I mean, that's Ed. That's
Yeah.
his thing. But I spoke to someone last night who had tried it as well. I haven't had a chance to try it myself, and they said they didn't. And this was someone who tries these models a lot, and they said they couldn't really see a big upgrade or a major step change, or even a particularly big difference between what Anthropic's Claude can do.
hmm
But again, I really need to try this out myself.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite hard to kind of put a judgment. I mean, they literally announced it last night. So we can all test it, we can all play around with it, but I think it will really get a sense of how useful this is when people start using it for work.
Yes. Okay. So let's end this one just with the unfair question: buying or selling the hype on Strawberry or O1? I'll go first. I'm buying it. I think it's going to be more difficult for like the quote unquote word cells versus the shape rotators, right? The people who deal in text versus the people who deal in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this was sort of a necessary step. And you see the benchmark improvements here. And it's not going to look immediately just like the way that some of the other, let's say code completion, initially where it's like, okay, so it can complete some code, and now it's starting to really look like it can code things up on its own. I think that this is going to be something that folks in the technical fields are going to use, and it will actually be a significant step up. Okay, how about you, buying or selling?
I would say sell, only because I haven't tried it yet, and also because I want to be a bit contrarian to you, because you said buy. So, no, I mean, that's a hard one to answer. I guess I'll just say sell for now, because this thing about the benchmarks, I personally don't fully understand the benchmarks and what they're weighted against and what they're sourced against, and are these completely standardized across the industry? Those are really impressive numbers, but what do they actually mean? And again, I think it's very hard to really judge this until you try it.
Right. And I'll just give one more piece of evidence on my side. I know this is unfair, but I just saw a thread with a stream of folks who've like tested O1 on their personal benchmarks. Like a lot of people have their like own personal tests to give AI, and it's just like person after person talking about how much better it is than their previous tests. Okay, but the other thing here is really like maybe, I don't know, like this is preview, of course, and
yeah, that's
right. You mentioned it, and you're totally right that we've seen Sora, which has been a lot of hype and not released yet, and we've seen the voice or GPT-4o voice application, and the status of that is still up in the air. And should we give OpenAI a couple weeks of gratitude for the magic intelligence in the sky and have more of our toys soon? I don't think so.
Well,
so
I'll just have in spite of everything I've said, there is an argument that actually maybe behind the scenes, Sam Altman and OpenAI have just realized like they need to focus on one thing that really matters. And if I was going to look at those three things, like the voice interface, Sora, and reasoning capabilities, hands down, the bigger deal is reasoning capabilities. So maybe what's happening behind the scenes is they've just put a pause on these two other things which aren't that important. And the reason I say that is because last week I talked to some people in the Valley, and a couple of times it came up that there's growing discontent about Sam Altman's general lack of focus, and people are saying he's disorganized and they're trying too many things. And I spoke to one VC who even said that he was going to meet Sam Altman that weekend, and I said, if you could give him one piece of advice, what would you tell him? And he said, I would tell him that he needs to look at everything he's doing and he needs to pick two things and just stick with those two things. And he said, even if one of those things is this big chip infrastructure project that's fine. Do
Hmm.
that, but then just do one other thing and nothing else. Because I think there is a concern that OpenAI has just got too many pans on the fire.
Yep.
And so I would say, I wouldn't discount Strawberry and slash O1, just in case. Actually, maybe what's going on here is that they've realized they need to just focus on the higher stakes uh, bet that counts for more.
Yeah, Parmy, you're convincing me here because there've been sort of rumblings and rumors going around that OpenAI has lost it and too many people left. Look, Ilya's gone. He just raised $1 billion, and John Schulman's gone, and he's at Anthropic now, and the rest of the leadership team has thinned out, and there's been staff exodus, and OpenAI ruined itself. And I
Hmm.
think we can say definitively, well, maybe not definitively, but we can say with good confidence now that the company is still pushing the envelope. And
Yeah.
I was just on the chatbot arena where they battle different chatbots against each other and you vote which gives the best output. And GPT-4o is still the winner there.
Oh,
So
really? More
I
so
think
than
that,
Claude?
oh yeah, it's definitely
Okay.
above. It's actually Gemini is second. And this is where people vote on what's
Oh,
best.
wow.
So now
Yeah,
human
yeah, yeah,
manipulation could be responsible for some of it, but I do think that
yeah.
the death of OpenAI has been prematurely reported. That being said, there's a lot of competition. We
It's
can agree on
so
that, but they're
fierce.
not dead yet.
Yeah, yeah.
And they also want some more money. So it brings us to our next story. This is actually coming from your outlet. Bloomberg has a report out that OpenAI's fundraising is going to put the valuation of the company at 150 billion. And a couple of weeks ago, we just did a show talking about how it was going to be 100 billion, and that's
Mm.
crazy. But they are, according to Bloomberg, in talks to raise 6.5 billion from investors and another 5 billion from debt. In debt from banks, so they're looking to basically bring in 11 billion dollars, and it's the round like we talked about in this on the show in the past. Thrive Capital, Microsoft, Nvidia, and Apple are all talking about getting involved. So let me ask you this: you obviously just wrote the book about these companies. Um, what's the deal with taking all this money and getting this massive valuation and still being a nonprofit? How's that even
Oh, but
possible?
they're not a nonprofit, right? They're capped profit. And one of the reports that came out a few weeks ago, there was a report saying that there's some interest among the management of OpenAI to restructure the company in such a way that it could become even more investor friendly. So go even further in the direction of being a for-profit organization. Um, so the only way that it's really a nonprofit is that it has this nonprofit board which has a significant amount of power that is very unusual for a company. For example, it had the power to fire the CEO. Or did it? It didn't really, right? Because he came
Yeah, in the
back.
end.
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, that's just what I kind of tried to make. The main point I wanted to say in my book was that I was just so fascinated when ChatGPT came out that two people, Sam Altman and Demis Hassabis, had become like these rivals to create artificial general intelligence. And they both started out with really humanitarian goals, like really altruistic goals of like curing cancer, solving climate change. Sam Altman wanted to, improve the wealth of people across the population. But it was just so hard to keep those goals in check when money became such a focal point because building AI
Hmm.
was so expensive, and um, and they just ended up getting sucked into the gravitational pull of big tech companies. I mean, that's just there's no two ways about it. But what I really wanted to highlight was that both of them knew from the start that they needed to protect this this technology and how it was used and that it wasn't misused. So they tried to. That's why Sam tried to start OpenAI as a nonprofit, and that's why Demis tried to break away from Google and also become something like a nonprofit. He spent years trying to do that and spent a lot of money and time trying to do that. And they both failed to create these structures of responsible governance. Like if I'd had, that's really what my book is about, is governance. I would never use that title because no one would
Hmm.
buy the book. But
Right.
that's
You
basically
just
what
gave
this
away the
is.
game here, so.
Yeah. But yeah, that's
Right.
basically what this is about. These companies are now, you know, the tech is now controlled by a handful of very large big tech companies,
Hmm.
um, in a regulatory vacuum. There's no proper oversight. And there were,
Right.
people tried to put that in place, but we as a society have not figured out how to balance innovation with proper
So
oversight.
what do you think all this money is going to go toward then? I mean, are they going to even be able to justify that valuation? They're losing money, a lot of money now. I mean, what's the business case for investing in them?
Well, I mean, they get a revenue share with Microsoft, right? From
Yes.
through Azure. So if Azure does really well, then then OpenAI can do quite well. They've got the subscription business, which is actually pretty steady. They've got something like 200 million active users of ChatGPT. So, I mean, it's not a bad business. You could say long term that can grow to something quite impressive. But these things take time, right? I mean, with Amazon, it took many years for it to become a profitable business, and maybe people are looking at OpenAI in the same way. The problem is that, as you well know, uh, building and improving foundation models is incredibly expensive. And it's not just the compute, right? It's the salaries. Like these
Right.
senior AI scientists and engineers.
How much are they making?
Okay. So I spoke to someone about this who, from an organization that was trying to hire, um, that just was asking questions about salaries. And so one kind of mid-tier AI startup was asked, so how much would you pay for like a senior AI kind of executive? And they said it's basically around, over the course of 4 years, $6 million.
Okay.
Um, I've heard elsewhere, $2 to $3 million a year, salary,
That adds
including
up
options.
over time.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so
it
one way
does.
they're trying to make the money back is potentially raising the subscription fees for these bots. I mean, they don't make any money on the bots right now. But one report that came out of, I think, the Information this week is that, um, let's see, it says in internal discussions at OpenAI, subscription prices ranging up to $2,000 per month were on the table. Uh, so basically, the thought is maybe that these new reasoning models, again, the ones that were released this week, Preview and Mini. So there's like an actual model that OpenAI has that, I think will eventually make its way into the product. And if the models do live up to this sort of improved benchmarks and become super valuable for some cases, maybe they can charge much more. Is that one way that they end up justifying the valuation?
Maybe, but I can't see it being that high.
That's pretty high.
I can totally see big numbers being tossed around though. And I'll give
Hmm.
you the reason why I think that is, I think it was last year, I was talking to somebody who was from an AI company that worked very closely with OpenAI, and they talked to people at OpenAI all the time, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, so Sam and OpenAI, they're doing another funding round, and he wants to raise $100 billion." He was like, "They're saying that's what they're saying in the company." He's trying, and I remember responding, "You mean 100 billion valuation, right?" And he said, "No, no, no. They actually want to raise 100 billion." I could never corroborate that with anyone, but my sense is that big numbers get tossed around a lot,
Right, like the
maybe
trillion.
among. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's a great example. The whole $7 trillion chip thing. Was it seven
Right.
trillion? Yeah.
It was a 7
Um,
trillion. Yeah.
yeah.
Raising.
Um, so a lot of huge, ridiculously galactic-sized numbers get tossed around when people talk about OpenAI, and probably inside OpenAI too. Um, but fundamentally, to your point, do they need to raise the price? Yes, they probably do. I mean, look at us. We've both been paying for both Claude and ChatGPT, because it's sort of affordable. But maybe they can afford to raise the price if they put in these capabilities where these systems become integral to your work process. Then yeah, maybe you'll just have to pay more, and maybe they can get away with it.
Is one reason why companies like Nvidia and Apple and Microsoft might be involved in this round is just because like even if they don't make their money back, if OpenAI is able to keep pushing the envelope, then their valuation will just go up. Like it's a smart investment, almost like there was a moment where OpenAI said, if you're going to invest in us, you guys should think of it as a donation. And maybe in these companies' cases, that's fine because it's going to work out for them if it works out for the
And also
company.
they can afford to do it, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not like Apple has just been told like they had to put $13 billion in an escrow account to pay this Irish tax fine from the European Union. And that's like it sounds like a huge number, but really it's just pocket change for them. So an investment in OpenAI, I think the company that's completely on the forefront of AI right now, and it literally sparked the generative AI boom almost 2 years ago, I think is worth it for them.
Yep. Okay, one more question for you about funding. So every now and again, you get these rumblings that OpenAI might be trying to raise from, like basically Gulf oil states. I'm going to get it wrong, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, but of that nature. It just kind of seems interesting to me that it's going to these states and the companies that initially started with this mission of AI being beneficial for the world, being like, what we really need to do, like give an oil oligarchy or I don't know, authoritarian type country a stake in what we're doing. What do you think about that?
Well, let's align or do we align ourselves with the oil oligarchy in the Middle East or the tech corporate oligarchy in the West? What to
I would go with the
choose?
tech ones, but anyway.
Yeah, it depends which part of the world you're in and what your worldview would be on that. I mean, there's so much money out there, right? They've got sovereign wealth funds, which means they can make these huge bets on risky investments. And Dubai and the UAE, there's been a big push to try and diversify away from their very, very big dependency on oil and try to move towards more of a tech-based economy. So it absolutely makes sense for them to be putting money into something like this.
Right. And you've been following these companies pretty closely, obviously writing the book about them. Um, is there going to be a point where they just kind of run out of runway? Like, is this sustainable?
Is what sustainable? The
The
money
AI,
or
this all the money being spent on the training of the models in AI. I mean, it's so capital intensive.
yeah.
Like eventually, and you're like we were talking earlier about how it's going to take some time to figure out the use cases, even though there probably are use cases there. But like,
Yeah.
how much time does this have before it has to show results that return on the investment?
Maybe I'd say a few years, and I think there isn't as much pressure on the big tech companies. Like I wouldn't, it's very tempting to just say it's not sustainable because it's so expensive and it's moving so fast and there's no obvious use cases. But you have to remember these companies have billions of dollars on their balance sheets. They can totally afford this, and they can afford to keep spending like this for the next few years at least. I mean, look how much money Mark Zuckerberg spent on the metaverse, and that really went nowhere. Um, and he's still like Meta's still doing fine. In fact, Meta as a stock has outperformed all the other big tech companies in
Yeah,
the last, I think, since the start of the year.
thanks to its
So
advertising. And it's still called Meta, by the
exactly,
way. So maybe they haven't fully given up, but
yes, he's in it for the for the long haul. But yeah, I think they will continue to spend quite big on this um, for the next few years, and because you know, although they do need to see their enterprise. Like again, I'm thinking from the hyperscalers' perspective. But you talk to someone like Google, and they have. I literally asked someone from their cloud team last week. Um, what their inbound interest was for from enterprise customers for Gemini
hmm
and for their API. And they were just couldn't give me a number, but they were like, it's just crazy the amount of usage that we have. And I was like, has it doubled in the last year? He said doubled would be an understatement. Like the rate of usage increase, it has really gone up. So they're doing fine. But the question is just like whether businesses will continue spending on these models. Um, we can go into this if you want, but this is probably for a whole other episode. Like how do you measure return on investment?
Right. It's not simple.
And it's absolutely not. And I think people are starting to accept that. They're starting to see buying AI services as a bit like having email. Like, it's hard to measure as a business
That's
how
interesting.
much having email actually makes you money. But if you took email away from all your employees, your business would just fall apart. It's absolutely integral to operating. And so I think there's a sense that AI will become like that. It will become a really important component of making a business more productive, but it will be really hard to measure exactly how it does that in
Yeah.
numbers.
But the thing is, most email programs are free, and this is very expensive to produce and run. But I think
Mm.
that's a quite we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But I do want to hear a little bit more about sort of your perspective on Sam and Demis, and if there's stuff that the public don't know about them that they should know. And then I also want to talk about this story about how some local news sites are using people who've turned themselves into AI avatars to read the news and like do local news programs. So why don't we do that right after this? And we're back
Sounds good.
here. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Sorry.
Um, Everything's good. We have a couple more minutes.
Oh, you're asking me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. In terms of my time, yes,
Yeah.
I've definitely got time.
Okay. Great. Okay. And we're back here on Big Technology Podcast with Parmy Olson. She's the author of Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. It's out this week. Okay, so Parmy, I'm curious, like, I think a lot of us have a perception of Sam Altman. Um, Maybe many, but somewhat fewer have a perception of Demis Hassabis, who's the head of DeepMind at Google. What do you think? What did you learn about the two of them that is not fully represented in the public consciousness that is important to know?
Well, what I learned from both of them is that they both were incredibly mission-oriented people. They had very different personalities. Sam was a very outspoken, charismatic individual. He was an entrepreneur's guru. He, even after his first startup, Looped, essentially failed by Silicon Valley standards, he somehow managed to create this incredible respectability around himself among startups and venture capitalists in Silicon Valley as this almost Yoda of of entrepreneurial advice. He would post blog posts with just like 99 pieces of advice for startups. And he was just an incredibly good communicator and someone who would also, at the drop of a hat, help other entrepreneurs. So I've spoken to entrepreneurs who said, yeah, I just, sent him an email. I didn't think he'd respond. And then he responded right away and introduced me to someone who helped me raise money. And so he has
Wow.
really engendered a ton of goodwill among startups because he's very responsive like that. Um, and it's actually given him an incredibly powerful position in the valley, just as someone who's incredibly well connected. And that was even before he started OpenAI, when he was the head of Y Combinator. Demis
You
is
mean
like
DeepMind? Oh, no, it's Sam. Sam you're talking about.
yes, yeah,
I'm
I'm talking
sorry.
about
Go
Sam.
ahead.
I'm talking about Sam.
Yeah.
Um, Demis on the other side of the ocean, a very different kind of personality. He started off he was a chess prodigy growing up. One of the best chess players in the world when he was only 13, and he was obsessed with games. I don't know if you ever played the video game Theme Park,
I haven't,
but
but I know that's Demis's game.
that
He did it
he
as a
built
teenager or something.
he did it when he was 17. He co-designed it with Peter Molyneux at Bullfrog Productions. And then he went to Cambridge really young and started his own video game company, which in the same way that Sam's first startup failed, Demis's first startup also failed. And both entrepreneurs really learned a lot from those failures. And both kind of came out of that with this goal of wanting to build artificial general intelligence. Demis did it first. He was actually the first to kind of put his neck on the line as a among the scientific community to do something that was really a fringe theory back in 2010, and started a company that actually wanted to build human level AI. It was seen as very crazy, and nobody would put money. I actually spoke to an investor yesterday who was one of the VCs who didn't back DeepMind, and now they absolutely are kicking themselves for it now. But it was just they had no business model, and the only way they could make money was raise money was to come to Silicon Valley, where people are selling the future, and they raised money from Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. And then, of course, they built DeepMind. I mean, Demis, I think, is like a really fascinating character. He's absolutely obsessed with games, and he's also really, really good at winning games. If you ever play him at foosball, he will beat you. He's just like very, very good, or chess, or soccer. And I think maybe that's also a trait he shares with Sam, that they both are very competitive and want to win. And Demis also has an incredible, almost obsession with winning a Nobel Prize. This is what I've heard from people who worked with him, that was kind of the goals that he put for the company. But I think both men, played in my mind. I wanted to kind of hang the story on these two guys. There's a huge cast of characters in the field of AI, but I don't like to tell a story about AI governance. Sometimes you just need to boil it down to a couple people to make it just a little bit clearer and more simple. And so that's why I focused on just those two.
Okay, one more story I want to get to before we head out, which is I was looking up your interviews on YouTube and saw you stand before the camera and deliver this monologue. And as I'm watching, I realized, that's not Parmy, it's AI Parmy. And
Jesus.
You're the perfect person to speak about this, because this week I read a wild story in Wired about a Hawaiian journalist who worked at this paper called The Garden Island. And basically it is a it's a words news site, and it's covering this island of a couple thousand people, maybe 70,000 people or so. And the news site all of a sudden started to do news video. And who are the anchors of these news videos? They're actually AI avatars that will basically take news from the site and then read them to you, and you can watch the video as if it's like a regular bit of news. So just thinking about the direction of AI, we were talking earlier about the ways that it might be applied. What do you think about the fact that we're starting to see effectively news anchors being, wouldn't call it replaced yet, but being mimicked by AI avatars like the one that you became in your video, and actually reading real news to real people on news sites like the Garden Island?
I think, in a nutshell, I think our future is just going to be so noisy. We're going to have so much information in so many different forms. It's going to be not just text. We're going to have so much more video. We're going to have so many more images, because AI is just going to be generating so much of it. And that's whenever I talk to businesses about how they're using generative AI, they always say, we're not replacing jobs. We're not replacing humans. We're augmenting them, which I think it sounds a bit just disingenuous, and that's just their way of protecting themselves reputationally. But it's kind of true. I think we are, in the case of the newscasters, it's not replacing newscasters, right? It's just creating more videos for people to watch, potentially, of news, so that they don't necessarily read it on text. It's just another way of consuming news. And that's what I see potentially happening with generative AI, is that, I genuinely cannot see major TV news networks replacing their anchors with generative AI anchors anytime soon, if ever. But I certainly could see, local radio stations, local website, not even local TV stations, but really small outlets that just don't do video. Now here's a chance for them to do video. And so we're just going to have lots more video content available to us through all sorts of different platforms.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was thinking about it for big technology, what would have happened, and obviously the technology is not there yet, but what would have happened if we would have fed some AI the news stories about Strawberry and the OpenAI valuation, and then written one sentence sort of perspectives from each of our side, and then fed the AI your book, and then say, create a podcast episode. I mean, that stuff is crazy. Now, I would never do it. I think that our stuff is better than what you would get from AI generated slop. But yesterday I spoke with an editor who had his body scanned and uses this video as an added feature on his website, and it was amazing. He was like, first of all, he was like working with the software company and was like, my accent is and my English is not as good as your technology is making it out to be. So I wanted it to sound like his quote was dirtier. I think he meant rougher, not like I don't think he wanted it with swear words and stuff. And they did it. And it sounds a lot and looks a lot like him. And they're getting thousands of views on each of these videos.
Oh, they're getting thousands of views, really?
Yeah.
See, this is what I don't get, is do people actually like this? And I think what is going to happen, I mean, you said thousands of views, right? So the more people see AI-generated content, the more they get used to it, and the more they get comfortable with it. So even though video avatars of news anchors and this gentleman you mentioned probably look a little bit uncanny valley, actually, if you watch that kind of content for long enough, you start to just be okay with it. And then maybe like when it comes up in your TikTok feed or Instagram, or you find it on a website, you click on it because you're okay with it. You're used to it.
Exactly. Oh, God. Well, everybody, this has been a real discussion between real me, and I hope that this is real you, Parmy. Is this
As
real?
far as I can
Give
tell.
a sign of life.
Yeah.
I don't know. I couldn't tell.
Thumbs
okay.
up?
There's a thumbs up. All right. Right. Your avatar couldn't do that because it's just.
Yeah. See? There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I am so glad we got a chance to speak, and I do encourage people to pick up the book. It's called Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. And man, Supremacy. It's the right title for it, right?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the release, Parmy. Great speaking with you. Thanks again for coming on.
Oh, likewise. This was really fun. Thank you.
And it was for me as well. All right, everybody, thanks for listening. On Wednesday, I'll have an interview with the CEO of LinkedIn, Ryan Roslansky, so stay tuned for that. Yes, we're talking about AI. Of course we are. They're a Microsoft subsidiary. And then I'll be back on Friday with Ranjan breaking down next week's news. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Big Technology Podcast.